Jonathan, I don't know if you were able to hear some of those calls from LBC, but what did you make of what you heard?
Oh, yes. I mean, this is what we're hearing from parents all around the world. Part of the reason why there is so much movement on the left, on the right, wherever you have adults with kids, they see these problems. The ones that you focused on were about how children are being exposed to strangers who want sex or money from them. So it's just kind of insane that we've gotten to the point where, while we're so careful about our kids talking to strangers on the playground, but yet we allow them to talk to strangers all over the world online. Something has to change quickly.
Jonathan, I really enjoyed your book, The Anxious Generation. I'm particularly interested in what you say about what this does to children's brains, because, as you say, this is a period when the brain is developing very fast, and you liken it to wet cement drying. Can you explain the damage you think is being done to children's brains, which could last all their lives?
Yeah, that's right. So there are two big periods of brain growth. The first is in utero and in the first couple of years of life. The brain reaches almost its full size by the age of 6. And then things slow down, brain growth slows down, bodily growth slows down, but then it all picks up at puberty. And the brain is sort of rewiring itself to go from the child form to the adult form, all through puberty, ending around the age of 25. This is the period when the brain needs guidance from your local culture into how do you become a proper Brit or American or whatever it is. This is why kids are looking for role models. So this really starts around age 9, 10, 11. Early puberty is when this period is so crucial. And when do we start our kids on social media? Right about then. And so rather than learning from their culture, learning from their elders, they're learning from weirdos selected by an algorithm for extremity. And so we're putting garbage into our kids at the most vulnerable time of brain development.
And at the same time, we're stopping the development of focus and intelligence and concentration as well. I mean, I couldn't do this show that I do every day without some degree of being able to concentrate, sometimes for some time. And if I wasn't able to do that, I couldn't do my job. And I wonder whether we are growing children who cannot concentrate in the same way as older generations.
Absolutely. Yes. Actually, Andrew, I spoke with you when I was in London, I think it was in April. And at the time, I was focused on the mental health harms. And that's what I focused on in the book. And what I've realized now, especially from talking to my own students at New York University, from just listening to students more and more, is that I grossly underestimated the harm because I focused on the mental illness, which is gigantic. But I actually think the larger harm is going to be exactly what you just said. Many young people now say they cannot read a book because as soon as you get bored with anything, as one of my students said, I open a book, I read a sentence, I get bored, I go to TikTok. So if they're not able to read a book, and many of them are now saying they can't watch a movie. They can't watch a 90-minute movie. They can't pay attention for that long. They need multiple screens, multiple distractions. And so as basically there was the little intro overview, I heard the audio just before you and I came on, talking about how if a whole generation of humans across the world, across the Western world at least, if they can't pay attention, can't read a book, it's going to be very hard to see how they're going to be productive members of society or how they're going to handle the very, very difficult governments and politics that we're handing on to them.
Yeah. So this is a giant and very dangerous experiment that we are conducting in real time. But you did mention the harms and the suicides, and you have some very, very dramatic graphs in your book about the number of children being admitted to acute mental hospitals or units, and the number of people sadly killing themselves. And they go shooting up at exactly the same time as the smartphone arrives.
That's right. So the first chapter of my book chronicles what has happened across the Western world, particularly the English-speaking countries. For some reason, the 5 or 6 major English-speaking countries, we're like on exactly the same schedule. And when you track out the mental health stats, you find no real trend from the 90s through about 2010, 2011. Then all of a sudden, the numbers go shooting up. Now, some people say, oh, well, Gen Z, they're just comfortable talking about it. They're willing to admit it. No. If that was the case, then we would not see it in behavior, and we do see it in behavior, most clearly in self-harm. And so here, there's very good data in the UK from medical records. We have good data in the US from hospital admissions. And what we see is in both countries and in Australia and New Zealand, what we see is, especially for girls, relatively flat rates, and then boom, around 2013, the rate more for preteen girls, the rate is almost triple. So preteen girls did not used to cut themselves, and now they do. So something went really wrong around 2012. Whatever it is, it hit preteen girls the hardest. I wonder what it could be. That's the year that Facebook bought Instagram. That's the year that girls' social life moved on to Instagram.
So in a way, you're pulling the warning lever for governments all around the world. The Australians have gone quite a long way. We have the Online Harms Bill. And at LBC, we've had a day devoted to this subject. Peter Kyle, who's the Secretary of State who covers this stuff, has been talking to one of my colleagues, Sheila Fogarty. And I'd be very interested in your view about what he's said. If you listen carefully, we'll just hear him now.
Look more fully about some of the things that are being said. If you take Elon Musk, for example, he said some pretty strident things about regulation, but one thing he's been pretty consistent at is about keeping children safe online. He's been very, very outspoken about child safety. If you look at Mark Zuckerberg, there was a lot of attention about the statement he made before the inauguration back in January. But actually that statement that talked about free speech also said, and I quote pretty much verbatim, that we need to do better at taking illegal content down and keeping children safe. So there is a lot more nuance in there, even from those people who are leading these big tech companies when it comes to child safety.
Now, I think, Peter Kyle's a good guy. Nonetheless, do you detect a certain amount of complacency or naivety, perhaps, there about the willingness of the big American tech companies to do what's right?
Well, yes and no. And let's distinguish between the two companies. So Meta is, I think, the biggest perpetrator here of harm, along with TikTok and Snapchat. But Meta has a very, very long history of opposing any attempt at regulation. They're very, very powerful, very effective in the U.S. at stopping any regulation to protect children. What Zuckerberg wants to do is keep the focus on content. This is just about harmful content. And we have 3,000 content moderators we've just hired. We have stated. So if you keep the focus on content, that's where Zuckerberg wants it. But it's not the content. It's the design. These things are designed to hook children and keep them on. And that's what is really harming them, is a lot of it is just the loss of childhood. 5 hours a day is the average. A lot of kids are on 10 hours a day just on social media. So no, just taking down some content isn't going to matter. But a different point about Elon Musk. Musk is a little different. It's true. A very important point was that X and the CEO of X, Linda Yaccarino, were very helpful in trying to get our Kids Online Safety Act through Congress. She would not have done that without Elon's approval. And Elon tweeted support. And so did Donald Trump Jr. So I think we are seeing this as a bipartisan issue. X, their business model doesn't depend on grabbing lots of children. Meta, Instagram and TikTok, it does depend on grabbing children.
So that's really interesting, because you occasionally hear the argument here, we can't really protect our children politically from what's going on because Elon Musk and Donald Trump will get cross and come after us. That's not true.
Yeah, no, that really is not true. I mean, look, everything is a minefield now. It's hazardous to run anything or make any decisions. So it's a very, very confusing time. I understand that. But the important point I want to make is that protecting children from these harms is something that conservatives and progressives and everybody sees. This is why so many governors in the U.S. In the U.S., our Congress isn't really doing much, but we have 50 states, and most of those governors are parents, and most of them are acting. So we created this problem in the U.S. We can't solve it. We really hope that Australia and the UK and the EU will act and change the global norms.
Yeah. Jonathan, it's really good to talk to you. This is one of the most important subjects there is. Next time you're in London, please pop into the studio and we will carry on the conversation. But for now, thank you very much indeed.